Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, where we analyse the best health tech stories of the week every single week. I'm Huw, and today I'm joined by Jess Farmery from the SomX team. We're soon to be joined by Jessica Somaru from the SomX team, and for special guest today is Ian Coyne from Coulter Partners. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Jess, for joining me. How have your weeks been?
Yeah, so it's been health in Amsterdam this week, so it's been pretty full on. A lot of familiar faces, and I have to say congrats to Henry and the team that put that on, because genuinely a stellar conference. I think soon it'll kind of be the best health tech conference in Europe. And one thing I think that was quite amusing is obviously a lot of people have been to health in Vegas, and they brought over some of the kind of Americanisms. So there were hairdressers on site. There was sort of live music in the evening. I think the Europeans might need to adjust to that, or health might need to adjust to the Europeans. But great experience, stellar audience. I think everyone was represented. You had the kind of Google, GEs, the world, all the way down to the really early stage companies on their booths. So I think a brilliant kind of ecosystem building event.
Fantastic. It's certainly been lighting up LinkedIn, and I'm not remotely bitter that I wasn't there. But, it does look like it was a great event. Top takeaways from the week?
I think positivity for the investors, number one. There's a lot of new deals coming through, which is a good sign. Two, I think the focus on the US from European companies is as acute as ever, but I don't think it's any easier than it has been before. I think there's probably more of an understanding that the US is not one giant market. It's a really fragmented system, and actually maybe the NHS is not as difficult as it seems when you look at the US market. But I think going back to the first point, I think more than ever to be successful, we saw a lot of acquisitions. Psychic announced a big acquisition while we were there. I think the sort of the ecosystem way of success is, I think, what we'll see much, much more over the next couple of years.
Jess, how about you? How's your week?
Feeling like the only person in all of Europe who wasn't at Health this week. But yeah, holding the fort in London, watching on, but enjoying that London summer has finally arrived. So that is something positive that's come out this week. And yeah, lots of good opportunities to get stuck into some client work when the rest of the ecosystem was a little bit quieter than normal.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the rest of the ecosystem was stuck in Schiphol Airport for several hours on Monday and Thursday. So I'm calling that a win for the UK-based SomX team. Ian, a lot of people will probably know you. Others may not. So maybe do you want to just tell listeners, I guess, who you are and, about the study that you're working on?
Yes. So I'm Ian Coyne. I'm a client partner at Coulter Partners. Those who are not familiar with us, we're the leading and largest executive search firm dedicated to all of life sciences. So medtech, health tech, biotech, tech bio now, and also doing things like alternative meats and alternative proteins, because it's kind of a similar process to drug R&D, but you produce some tasty bacon at the end rather than a drug. And I focus solely on digital health, which is a kind of huge area. But if you imagine at one end, you've got the AI and drug discovery companies that are deploying generative AI, which I'm sure we'll get onto, all the way across clinical development, real world evidence into sort of healthcare transformation through tech, and all of the platforms and software that sits under that. So it's a big world, but a fascinating world, and hence being at Health to meet all of the key people.
Yeah, it'd be great to know, what you've been doing with the study, what you're trying to achieve, and I guess some of the results you've had so far.
So just a bit about the study. Having worked in this space now, so kind of in previous life, I used to recruit for kind of telco, really interesting direct consumer tech companies. But 5 years ago, moved into digital health because the parallels are really interesting between, connected with patients, data, the use of AI, etc. And, kind of 4.5 years into that, really felt that the people that choose to either found or run, particularly early stage health tech companies, kind of look and feel different. And I mean that in a really nice way. but it was a bit unfair to kind of just make that statement without having some data. So asked a few of my network if they'd go through a full psychometric and work styles profiling platform, which 50 of them agreed to do. And we published the report as to, what does a digital health CEO look and feel like? And the results are, if I kind of pick out 4 key findings, perhaps in the unsurprising bucket, they are kind of off the charts innovative. So they sit on the 90th and 95th percentile when it comes to new products and services and driving organizational change. So it's always nice when your data reflects what it should reflect. So that was kind of a positive thing. In the more surprising / challenging area, you've got the fact that they've got a quite inherent risk combination of being autonomous, which is, often great. Daring, which is again something we look for in a lot of our leaders, but then also unpredictable. But the challenge is they're all 3. So it's kind of autonomous and unpredictable and daring. And the irony is when I speak to investors or CEOs or board members and kind of run through the results, they, nicely nod and kind of acknowledge that that's probably quite true. And then the final piece of the data is that when it comes to risk, they're massively risk tolerant. So when there's an element in the study which is called managing risk and how they think about that. So that includes things like adherence to guidelines, following rules and procedures, and they're in the lowest 5% on that. So in a highly regulated rule and procedures driven industry, they really don't do that. But when you put all that together, I think, but then they're the innovators, right? So they're the ones that are kind of, if you go into health tech following the rules, you're probably going to, produce a similar system we have today. So I think really nice kind of first set of 50. We're now pushing on to cohort 2, which is kind of 50 to 100. And once we start to get more than 100 people through the platform, we can actually break the data up by things like funding stage, founders versus later CEOs, and see if there's any differences in that cohort. So huge thanks to those that have done it, and any digital health CEOs listening, please reach out, please find me on LinkedIn, and genuinely everyone is welcome, and you get a full feedback session on the back of it. So a dedicated private leadership development session with one of our experts.
I mean, I have loads of questions on this, not least of all, how offended were people when you said, would you mind undergoing psychometric evaluation when you reached out to your network? But I guess it's sort of, a lot, as you said, a lot of it's unsurprising. You do need to have this sort of mindset, I guess, to, found a company and do things differently. And, as you say, if you went into digital health ready to follow the rules, you probably would end up exactly as we are today and struggling.
Yeah.
Equally, there's probably an inherent conflict there, right?
Definitely. And I think that is if you speak to most founders, that they will stress inherent frustrations with the system. But I would say they come in with the attitude of trying to also change the system. So if you go back perhaps 5 or 6 years when software as a medical device was like a thing and there were no real guidelines, a lot of those pioneers actually worked with the FDA and worked with the European bodies to say, look, we know you've never approved software before. You're kind of used to hardware and devices and diagnostics, but software is just the same, right? So it's something that can produce an outcome, a diagnosis, and we can be transparent. So yeah, I think they come in as pioneers, knowing that the system has got a lot of grit in it and a lot of friction that runs against you. But certainly all of the sort of founders and CEOs that we work with know that perhaps even 40% of the role is trying to change the system.
Well, that feels like a nice segue to take us on to our first story, particularly looking at the difference in, I guess, attitude and approach when it comes to scaling health techs. So our first story comes to us from Stat News, and that is that Freespira bets on slow and steady amid spectacular digital health collapses. We would not be the first people to have talked about the state of the digital therapeutics market and some of the, I guess, the fate of some big hitters in the market over the last 12 months. The most obvious being Pear Therapeutics with its fairly spectacular fall, which has been written about in quite some detail over the last 6 to 12 months. The question that lingers over that one is, where does the digital therapeutics market go next? And, is it fated to perform or possibly underperform over the next few months and years? But, so, obviously the challenge when Pear failed was that, was it the business model of the company, or was it that, as a market, DTX is fairly unsustainable? There were different takes that came out of that, but several of them were that the company was trying to scale too fast, too quickly, and hadn't established itself a market of customers in the areas that it was looking for. Freespira, makers of a software and device-based treatment for panic and post-traumatic stress disorders, is taking a different strategy, and one that potentially might have cracked overcome some of the challenges that other companies in this space were making earlier on, and that is slowly build to profitability a few thousand patients at a time. This sounds like maybe a bit of an obvious strategy, but I think it's going to be, from what they're saying, possibly quite a profitable one, hopefully, and could help them avoid some of the challenges that the sector has faced up to date. Their CEO, Joe Perekupka, told Stat News the company believes it will break even by the end of 2025 and will be cash positive in 2026. They recently raised $10 million to fuel their growth and to make product improvements that will eventually reduce costs. This sounds like a fairly sensible strategy and hopefully could avoid some pitfalls. But Ian, I'm keen to get your sort of read on this story. What are your takeaways? What are your thoughts? You mentioned you know the company well. Is this the right strategy?
Yes, I think last year there was a lot of talk about the sort of, does venture, with kind of everyone recognised 2023 wasn't a fantastic year for digital health. Some of the failures you mentioned. Does venture money work in digital health? And I think the answer is for, Joe and the team at Freespira, I think it does, but you probably just need a bit more patient investors around the table. And you need to think slightly different about the time on your returns. But there's sort of, why would you do that when you could perhaps deploy venture into, kind of faster growth, but perhaps higher risk companies? I think it is, look, this, despite, digital therapeutics is my favorite part of the market, and it's the one that's taken the most beating over the last 2 years. But I think it is the future of health. And if you stop someone in the street 20 years ago and say, look, you'll be able to, your car will drive itself, you can talk to your watch. And I think something like 68% of the planet will have a phone that, is mobile. They wouldn't have believed you. And I think now if you say to people, look, let's be ambitious and say 10 years time, a huge percentage of drugs will be prescribed with some sort of companion, whether that's hardware, software. I think that's where we'll be. And so, Freespira, to some degree, Achille, to some degree, Pear, went ahead and, a bit like we talked about earlier, were pioneers. And I think what Freespira has done is really smart, which is say, look, we're going to be slow and steady, but we're going to prove the model. And if you improve the model and you get to profitability, then everyone looks at you really differently as a business. And I think that's where a lot of the, certainly, companies that raised funds in 21 and early 22 maybe didn't have that focus because they thought, cash is quite cheap and we'll always be able to get some more funding. I think everyone knows that's not the case now. So I think it's a kind of really sensible, interesting model. But if you can get to a sustainable business, and I think a sustainable business in digital health that helps patients and is reimbursed, as Freespira are, I think it becomes a really attractive business.
It's interesting on the reimbursement piece. So, obviously they're doing very well. They're successful. They've got the FDA approval. They have customers and looking at, as we said, cash flow positive in 2026. So, super positive news from that. At the moment, they're not automatically reimbursed by payers. It's not automatically paid for by insurers. So it's a sort of, I guess, piecemeal, one by one, build relationships and negotiate in order to get there. Is growth contingent on that? That proving that model and changing it so that it is automatically paid for by insurers, or is it sustainable to go partnership by partnership?
So without getting into probably a 2.5 hour discussion around US healthcare systems, I think reimbursement generally is a challenge, even when you're approved. From what I understand, again, having never got reimbursement for anything, it is a challenge to get the cash through the system, regardless of your situation, regardless of codes. People say a lot about just because there's a code there doesn't mean people will pay for it. I think the other thing that I'd say is, I know there's quite a big European audience for this. When people talk about being successful in the US, I think had a kind of great conversation with one of the lawyers, and they said, like, being successful in the US doesn't mean, you're getting reimbursed through every health system. You're in every provider is using you. If you're Freespira are quite specialized, whether it's oncology, whether it's PTSD, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction. Success in the US could be getting into 3 or 4 of the healthcare systems, or being across 4 or 5 states with their reimbursement strategies, because again, state by state reimbursement changes massively, as does things like data protection and patient data privacy. So, it's not a monolithic market. But there are also other models. So, the sort of the reimbursement through insurers, through health plans is one model. A lot of companies we work with, if it makes sense, will go through partners like pharma companies or some of the kind of pharmaceutical brokers. So, there are lots of models that don't mean you've got to go down the piecemeal route, but ones where you can actually get market traction more easily without necessarily having a huge kind of US team state by state.
Jessica, can I bring you in on this? Any thoughts on the Freespira piece?
I absolutely have some thoughts, and I find it really fascinating that there is a in Stat News talking about the fact a company is going to become profitable in 2 years' time. Now, and that's not a criticism. I think it really speaks to the challenging environment that we're in at the moment, where probably 2 or 3 years ago, we were all focused on talking about how companies are going to get to IPO, how many companies are going to get to IPO, what valuation are they going to get, profitability to an extent, but not so much. I don't think it was seen as a particular priority. And I think that this is... It's refreshing because I think it's very honest, and I think it goes to show, I guess, to Ian's point, taking this slightly more stealthy approach to achieving that and working in a different way with investors to what we're used to, and actually how that investor, VC, private equity, wherever the funding is coming from, a slight shift in those dynamics and those relationships, because I think that certainly from an investor perspective, we're seeing that probably a bit more pragmatism where, I think they know that healthcare is a much longer play, but they're starting to come to the conclusion that actually it's an even longer play than perhaps they had bets on previously, but it is still worth it. And so reframing that, and it's really encouraging to see investors supporting companies to do it in a sustainable way, rather than just pushing them to hit targets that ultimately is going to crush human beings and potentially even companies as well. So I think it's really confronting seeing stories like this, and really speaks to where we've been over the last sort of 18 months. And I think it's huge credit to the company for coming out and being kind of loud and proud about the fact that, profitability is really important to us, but we're going to get there in the time that feels right to us, rather than kind of feeling the huge pressure that I know that companies often do, and particularly in what is a really challenging funding market at the moment. So yeah, I was just kind of blown away by this one, for all the wrong and right reasons.
A question back to you, Jessica, given also the companies you work with. Do you think VCs have gone too far the other way? Because obviously VCs are taking on risk. And I spoke to so many companies where everyone said that the bar is so high now. You kind of, whereas before you could come to a seed or series A at a point in the market. So perhaps pre-product market fit, certainly pre-revenue. I've heard quite a few times that now the bar's really high. And so would love your view if you're hearing the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think for so many companies who are would-be seed Series A, the expectations on the evidence and the track record that they need to produce for investors is almost unreachable. And I think, it's sad because it means that we're going to see a lot of companies kind of crumble before they even get any momentum. And even at seed, pre-seed, being able to demonstrate, full product market fit and revenue as well, paid contracts, when really at that stage, investment is about the team and the problem that they're tackling. I think that it probably has gone too far. That's certainly what I'm hearing. But I am also hearing that investors are getting itchy feet for a couple of reasons. I think there is dry powder out there that's ready to be deployed. And I'm under the impression that they're also getting pressure from their LPs, because that needs to be deployed if they're going to make returns on the terms that they've agreed with their LPs. So we're kind of at this almost stalemate where who's going to move first? What's going to be the thing that kind of, I don't want to say opens the floodgates, because that's how we got in this mess in the first place. But what's going to be the thing that unlocks that dry powder? And I think it's the political environment, if I'm honest. We are in a political hurricane right now with 3 big elections on the horizon. And so I think not just even from an investor perspective, I think even from a buyer perspective, no one's really felt like they've been in a position to commit to big contracts, to financial outlay, and even partnership and collaboration, because they just don't know what the next sort of 6 months holds. Whereas at least we're going to just have answers, and we're going to know probably what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like. So people are going to start to feel like they can now get on with things. So I wonder if that's going to be one of the things that helps us start getting a bit more momentum. But I also think there is just going to be a point where some investors are going to break and be like, we just need to start taking a bit more risk now, and reframing some of that criteria and the evidence that they're looking to see. Yeah, hearing from investors that, they've perhaps not, they've got money to spend, but they've not made any investments for 18 months. It's wild because there's so many great companies out there fighting to solve really genuine problems in the healthcare system, and with really compelling solutions. So all of the ingredients are there, but it's just going to take some kind of catalyst, I think, to move things forward. And I'm kind of hopeful that, we'll have a bit of a domino effect perhaps with these elections as they come through.
I'm really glad someone mentioned elections, because that's a fantastic segue into our second story. So our next story comes to us from Healthtech World, and that is, what do healthtech leaders want from the general election campaign? Healthtech World asked some of the great and good in digital health what they wanted to see from the next government when it comes to digital health investment. So whoever becomes the new health and social care secretary, as the article says, will need to invest in sorting out the basics of infrastructure, devices and care records if they want to build the foundations for, I guess, more high-tech things in the future, things like AI and innovation. But among, I guess, quite a large group of, fairly people who know their stuff about healthcare innovation, the wish list that they came out with is, it sounds easy. It's going to be a simple one, isn't it? So all we want to see from the next government is genomics used more in healthcare. We need to address health inequalities. We need to build on infrastructure, look at cloud first, interoperability, system efficiency for diagnostics to address the backlogs, a focus on patient safety, and various other things such as improving the quality of clinical data and using that, again, to address health inequalities, alignment between national and local projects, and overall a more supportive and less prescriptive central healthcare function in the UK. So not a lot to ask for, but obviously all positive, and preventative also. Healthcare also gets a look in. Moving us outside of the healthcare system, we also want to focus on things like air quality, housing status, unemployment. So quite a list to address for whoever does come in July. So what are everyone's initial reactions to this? I think obviously funding is limited. There is no silver bullet for the NHS's problems or healthcare's problems. Where would you put your money if you were Health and Social Care Secretary in July? Ian, I'll turn to you first.
Gosh, God, what a scary way to wake up on the 5th of July. I think I would put my money in two places. One would be preventative health, and the other one would be investing in research. So kind of probably two ends of that spectrum. So the research point, I think the UK has got an incredible academic through to commercial ecosystem. So university spin-outs, really phenomenal infrastructure around that. I know we talked about the challenges of funding, but we do it well. There's lots of institutions that do it well for across the whole of the UK. And I think that's, a brilliant way to drive innovation across all of this stuff. So to bring, new treatments, algorithms, devices to the market. I'd say that's a kind of huge tick, and you definitely, it's kind of like, UK PLC being a one big VC by putting money in there. And on the preventative side, I think we had a breakfast probably about a year ago now with all these kind of big brain PhDs that have set up tech bio companies. So, they're all doing artificial intelligence in drug discovery and, accelerating clinical trials through data, all this really, really cool stuff. And, some of them have brought multiple drugs to market. And at the end of it, they said, what the answer is going to be to all of this? We've talked for an hour and a half, had croissants, had coffee, talked about every type of AI possible. And they said, it's going to be walk more, eat more healthily, have better social relationships, and none of it requires a pharmaceutical intervention. So I think, and I go back to a quick show of hands, who played Pokemon Go? Come on, don't be shy.
I never downloaded it.
Never. Oh, Huw, come on! It's the future of health. So look, there was some, and the reason I did it, this I'll justify this now. So they did a longitudinal study of the impact Pokemon Go had on US activity. So Pokemon Go added, I think, about 144 million steps to US activity in the summer it was released. It reduced sedentary behavior by 30 minutes per player and increased exercise by 26%. So if you removed all of the kind of necessary friction in the health system and had a way of getting to preventative health that was, gamified, accessible to all. So it was, the demographic of the players was very varied. Then, Pokemon Go to me proved you can do preventative health if you can engage the population behind it. So yeah, that would mean waking up on the 5th of July. If I was the health minister, I wouldn't mandate Pokemon Go, but I would start in process, I think, a proactive digital population level engagement around health. So I don't know what that would look like, but that I would, it would be UK Go or something like that.
I'm enjoying this because it's just how much of this article is talking about the sort of the incremental investments in digital innovation and the things that are already there in healthcare, making EPRs work better, investing in care records, all of the kind of little tweaks that you can make with funding. And in fact, we've turned out that the actual solution is gamifying preventative health, which,
exactly.
It's given me a fantastic business idea, though. So just one step backwards from Pokemon Go, Tamagotchi, right? I feel like it could be an amazing platform for health education because you're taking care of this digital creature and you could be in the same way you would take care of a human or yourself. And you could therefore be taking care of this creature at the same time as learning about preventative health methods and approaches and self-care and things to be looking out for that you could then apply to yourself and people around you. Maybe this is what's going to be the domino effect to unlock some of this VC. I'm going to have this amazing idea. I'm going to pitch it to some great VCs. They're going to give me some funding. And then everyone's going to be like, if that got funding, I can do it too. And then they're going to go for it. And the funding gates will open. Solved it.
We're under NDA, I'll be Huw. Did I send you the NDA before the...
Just announced it to everyone. Keep your IP under wraps. Jess, you've had a read of this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're going to have to retract that section of the podcast because Jessica has just given away her idea to everybody. So maybe we could just go back and bleep out the actual idea. so that she can work on it in stealth for a while before she brings it out into the open. Looking through this article, I thought, very interesting timing to be thinking about what health tech leaders are wanting from the next government, because it's a massive election year, not just in the UK, but globally. I think it's probably one of the biggest election years globally ever, based on the number of elections that are going on in all different countries. And this is obviously a UK focused sample. And I mean, primarily it is just executives of health tech companies saying what they want from the government that's going to help with the growth of their company. So it's a little bit biased. But what I thought was interesting, first of all, I learned about the New Labour initiative to pay for patients to be able to pay to have TVs and telephones by their bedsides in NHS hospitals. Never knew that was a New Labour initiative, and I can't see that it's taken off or particularly lasted since then, but interesting to learn.
In some hospitals, they've actually removed them. They put them in and have taken them back. My nan was in hospital and had to go to a TV room to watch TV and a payphone to speak to my mum on the phone, but she was bedridden. Make it make sense.
I was going to say every hospital ward that I've ever been on or visited has had a TV room. I've never seen anyone have the bedside monitors. But and then another thing I thought was interesting was the emphasis on addressing social determinants and root causes of ill health. So not just focusing on healthcare delivery like NHS, also focusing on the things like housing, environment, air pollution. So I think whoever becomes the next health secretary is definitely going to have to be prepared to take the collaborative approach, working very closely with several different departments to kind of tackle some of those long-standing contributing factors to ill health. And also social care got a big shout out. So there was mentioned that, yes, in manifestos and when campaigning, politicians do tend to be all about the NHS, and they seem to think that's what the public want to hear about, their promises for the NHS. Social care tends to get sidelined, but without an effective social care strategy and social care policies, then NHS-focused policies are not going to succeed. I thought that was good that social care got a shout out.
No, I just want to pick up on that social determinants of health piece. I think it's a really, it's a really interesting piece, and I guess it picks up on the kind of wider preventative aspects as well. But I've had some great conversations with companies over the last few weeks and months, just looking at how influential your circumstances are in your health, but how disconnected a lot of healthcare continues to be when it comes to when you go to a GP, you talk about a problem, but there's no understanding of your context of where you live, and reporting, talking to your GP and talking to them about your the kind of social context that you're living in can often not lead to necessarily a specific outcome that actually improves those. You're given the support you have with your health issue from a health perspective, not necessarily from a social perspective, and no action is taken, maybe with the support of social services, with the support of your local authority to address that. And I think as we're looking to sort of 5th of July onwards, that social prescribing piece I think is going to become much more important. Just understanding and linking services, linking primary care with primary care, secondary care, and social care, and housing, and all of these wider determinants, to understand what is it that people are presenting with, and is there a population level issue we can address. So I think that's going to be very interesting, combined with the kind of more specific patient level social prescribing element of how what actions can patients take to improve their own health outside of just clinical remedies. So I think that's going to be an interesting one. Jessica, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, my first thoughts are I'm really glad that I know some people who are really good at IP. So I'm going to be giving them a call right after we finish recording. But my other thoughts are that I think all of these things are really important, in particular, the social determinants of health, health equity, preventative care. But I guess that the big thing for me is that I guess there's two elephants in the room here. The first is that there isn't going to be this magical deluge of money on the 5th of July. And that one of the huge challenges that I think fundamentally underpins so much of what we talk about in healthcare is obviously workforce, but deeper than that, the culture in the NHS that is contributing to people leaving in droves. So I would say that is the thing that needs to be dealt with as a huge priority, because I think once you deal with that, once you have a happier workforce that do feel, when you have that goodwill returned, which is, absolutely ran out after COVID and everything that has happened across the health system in the UK, but I think also globally. But once you have a happier workforce who feel valued and appreciated and properly reimbursed for the work that they do, and services that are more effectively staffed, I think that then unlocks addressing a lot of these challenges. I know that in part requires money, but I think it requires some really hard conversations. And I think it requires people to come to a table and listen, and be willing to do whatever they can to fix that, and a real commitment to that. Then I think we start to see lots of this stuff flow more easily, because clinicians in particular and people that work across the healthcare system are so critical to unlocking the delivery, implementation of so many of these things that we've talked about. And I think the other thing is, I'd mentioned about finance, we're not going to find this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow on the 5th of July. But what I'm hearing is there is paralysis in the system around decision making for deploying finance, but also that because of the structure of the NHS in part, also in part culture, there is some money available that is untapped, that is tied up in unreachable places and is not getting to places where it can have impact. And so I think it's something about looking at legislation that empowers health organizations to be able to spend money where is appropriate, and to unlock some of that, I don't want to say hidden, maybe hidden, but that like kind of unreachable, tied up money that could go some way to, again, addressing a lot of what we talked about, but maybe also addressing some of the kind of fundamental issues that we're seeing here in the UK and for the NHS. So those are my two things, because I think that then unlocks everything else. And then maybe, obviously my idea would be a real game changer too.
Our next story comes to us from News Medical Life Sciences: How Virtual Reality Transforms Women's Labour Experiences. We've spoken a lot about virtual reality and its role in helping people through pain and various surgical and operational procedures. This one is looking at VR's role in labour. So, pregnant women who want to experience natural birth often decide to use various non-pharmacological interventions to reduce the intensity of labour pain and associated anxiety, says the article. These interventions increase self-confidence and levels of satisfaction, allowing them to be responsive to the physiological process of giving birth. In a recent study, researchers explored the utility of virtual reality as a non-pharmacological intervention in managing labour pain anxiety. VR allows users to enter an immersive, three-dimensional, computer-generated world using a headset where they can be exposed to a multisensory experience. Results are very interesting. The current study that's been published was of 25 women who were thoroughly interviewed between 1 and 2 weeks of giving birth, 19 of whom used VR in early and active labour. The thematic analysis of the study identified 3 main themes: VR's impact on the labour experience, VR's use to manage labour pain, and the challenges of using VR in labour. 94% of women shared their willingness to use VR again in the future and to recommend it to their pregnant friends. So, another positive use case for VR. What is everyone's reaction on this one? Ian, I know you'd had a read of this one.
Yes, and so at Health last week, I was speaking to some people and said, the research around childbirth, given they said, the population of the planet, this should be the most researched space in the world, and sadly it's not. So I think it's great to see this innovation. I think the other thing that will, and we've gone probably nearly the full hour without mentioning either GLP-1s or generative AI. So I don't know how we managed that. But on the generative AI point, there's some really interesting companies coming through now using generative AI video capabilities to build really personalized health experiences. And I think this could be a great area where, just knowing what the experience is going to be like, obviously from a virtual reality perspective, not a physiological perspective. And education around that is massively important. And we talked about health equity and health equality. To be able to do that for all demographics is really important. So, I think it's at a small study, but great data. And I hope, kind of like the Freespira point, if you can get to 50 to 100 to 200, I think it's something the investors will look at and go, given the current 50% of the population that may go through childbirth and the, billions and billions of people on Earth that go through all the time, I think it's such an exciting space and very, very cool early data.
The results are certainly very positive so far. Jess, I know you've had a look at this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this reminded me of a feature article I looked at, must have been a couple of years ago now, about how VR tech was being used in prisons to help prisoners rehabilitate themselves to life in the outside world after super long sentences. And at the time, I remember thinking that was a really incredible use case for this new VR headset tech. So yeah, it was interesting to hear of another one, like a kind of practical use case that's not just playing games or having calls. I think, bearing in mind that women can be in labour for up to 48 hours sometimes, I think the distraction and calming aspect of having a bit of virtual escapism could definitely have a positive impact. I think I could probably use it. I would definitely use it. If you could combine that with some gas and air, then that would be an ideal solution. I wonder if this will become a commonplace on labour ward. Will every labour ward in the next 5 years have a VR headset for those who want to use it?
It's giving VR hypnobirthing, isn't it? Almost like, combining a computer game with hypnobirthing. So maybe NCT needs to take note of this kind of research and look at how they can support people who attend their classes. And, I assume that, maybe you're able to buy something like this to help. But I think we've also seen this kind of technology being used in things like supporting children through anaesthetic procedures and also through like young children who are going through cancer treatment and obviously having lots of invasive procedures, lots of injections and needling and all of that kind of thing to help distract them when they're having to go through that. So I think it's in part actually disappointing to see that it is such a small study. However, I think it's a really positive indicator for the direction of travel we should be going in and actually the need for further exploration in this space. It's a positive indicator, so let's explore it more. But there is good data around other healthcare scenarios that I think, we can extrapolate that into perhaps the birthing ward. So it's not necessarily that, we're only talking about 19 women here who have used it. Actually, when you look more broadly about where these kinds of technologies are being used for the same source of therapeutic outcome, we're seeing that increasingly it's efficacious and, risk of harm is minimal, compared to lots of other interventions. And I think, birth and, even pregnancy to an extent is an incredibly, stressful, also beautiful, I'm sure, experience for lots of people. And knowing that there are other options that, almost that they don't need to kind of take responsibility for, that they can kind of sit and experience through that experience, I think is probably quite heartening to kind of see and know about. I think it's definitely a positive indicator. But to Ian's point, it's an area that if we're going to throw money at something, this is definitely a space where we should be throwing money, particularly when we think about inequalities and equity, should I say, in experiences of particularly Black women, as they go through the birth experience for them and their babies. So I'd love to see more of this research, and I would love to see more funding being put to it to see how we can really transform that experience rather than just nudging it in a more positive direction.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's the question of how do we take it to critical mass, and perhaps this is one to add to the wish list for the 5th of July when the new Health and Social Care Secretary comes in. Big questions. I don't think we're going to answer them all today.
Digital health.
So I just want to thank Ian, Jess and Jessica for joining. It's been a fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed talking through all of the week's stories with you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Do check out the Healthtech CEO and Founder study. You can find the study as well as all the best news stories, podcasts and events in Healthtech at healthtechpigeon.com. We'll see you next week.